You know you're in the Bay Area when it starts with, please silence your cell phones and don't pitch your startup. That's awesome.
Between San Jose and San Francisco, there's a lot of pitching going.
Yeah.
So, Jason, welcome back to California. Welcome back to the Bay Area. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for our special guest tonight, Jason Kander.
Thanks.
Yes, so as probably has been presented to you all or pitched to you all, I'm a moderator. We're going to do some Q&A, but as a gentleman's agreement prior to the beginning of the event today, I will lead with a series of questions off and on, but we do intend this to be a little bit more conversational.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier on both of us when we don't have to memorize speeches.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's going to be substantive, it's going to be entertaining, and for those of you who care about voting rights and access to the ballot box, can it be a more timely conversation? Mm-hmm. Right? But before we get into the substance of it, I do have a quick question. Anybody here from Missouri originally? Raise your hands. All right. Or anywhere else in the Midwest, raise your hands. All right. So welcome home, Jason.
Yeah, thanks.
You got some extended family and friends here. By way of introduction, again, my name is Alex Padilla, and I'm privileged to serve as your California Secretary of State. And we're joined. He was introduced briefly, but just by way of a little bit more background, Jason Kander, president of Let America Vote, at the ripe old age of 36, is already quite accomplished. He has served former U.S. Army captain, having served in Afghanistan. He was the first millennial elected to any statewide office in the nation when he was serving as Missouri Secretary of State at the age of 31. He has since run for the United States Senate in Missouri, and as I mentioned, now serves as president of Let America Vote. More about that in a minute. But as we begin, I get to ask a question that I get so often. You were pretty young when you first ran for office. It was 9 years ago, so you were, about 27, running for state representative in Missouri. What was it like as a young person to feel the calling, to run? Did that serve as an advantage, a disadvantage? How did people look at you at such a young age running for an important office?
It's funny. So this is the oldest I've ever been. And
me too.
Yeah, that's what we all have in common. Building the bridge with the audience right away. In fact, I remember I knocked on y'all's door, Brad and Maureen, and so I remember when I knocked on 20,000 doors in my race for state representative in 2008, and I remember among the first doors, I remember thinking, how are people going to respond to this skinny kid with a crew cut, who was wearing a polo shirt with his name on it, right, so that people would remember. And what was interesting is that as you went up the generational spectrum, my youth was more and more of an advantage for me with voters, because what I would consistently hear from folks is they would say, yeah, you know what we need is some new blood. And I'm sure you've heard the same thing. And that's been true for me in every race that I've had, is that while at the beginning you might be a little hesitant. Now, I was never hesitant about whether I could do the job. What I did right before I ran for office is I led American soldiers in Afghanistan. So I felt like I know I was up to the job. But yeah, I always found the response actually really positive. I don't know if that's what you found.
Quick personal question, at the risk of being too personal. Were you living with your parents, or were you sort of out on your own at the time?
No, man, Alex, I was shaving and voting, and
and I asked that because, look, when I was running for city council, late '98 going into 1999, I was still living at home. And my opponents used that against me.
That's so cool. That's great.
My opponents used that against me. How could he be a representative on the Los Angeles City Council, second largest city in America? He still lives at home with his parents. Yeah. And as I was knocking on those doors, the older the voter got, the more it was good for you.
Yeah.
You're not married, save your money.
Yeah.
So if you're smart enough to stay at home, then you're smart enough to be my representative. So it does turn into an advantage.
No, I was married. We had a house, but my mom knocked on a lot of those doors with me, and my wife knocked on 8,000 of those doors. And my mom says that she gave 2 good knees to that campaign because she knocked like crazy. So.
And again, more similarities. My dad knocked on doors with me. He'd go the day after to put up the signs in the yard, cool. And my mom would make sure there was home-cooked food for the volunteers each and every day. So,
that's awesome.
Next question. It was, one thing that I get asked a lot, well, you both like to run at such a young age, and because of that experience, what advice do you have for young people who may be interested in pursuing politics or some form of public service, whether it's running for office or just kind of serving in government?
2 things. First, I tell folks not to focus on being something. And this is not like original to me. I'm not the first person to say this, but I feel real strongly about it because I do get, and I'm sure you do too, a lot of young folks who come up and they say, I'm interested in politics, I'm interested in running for office. And oftentimes they'll say, which office should I run for first? and I usually answer with a question. I say, what do you care about? What's the change you want to see in the world? And if there's an office between you and that change, then go after it. But if not, just go after the change. And so that's the first thing is don't focus on being something, focus on doing something. And then the second part is once you've figured that out, and if in fact you look at it and you say, I should be running for this office, that's how I'm going to affect this change, then just don't listen to anybody who tells you, wait your turn, it's that sort of thing. I don't really believe in that. I believe if you feel strongly about it and you're ready to serve, then jump forward.
Good. So running for office, again, something that we have in common. What we don't have in common, something that I tremendously respect and appreciate you for, is having served in the military as part of your public service. For those of you who read the Chronicle, there was an article today about Tom Tarantino, recently announced candidate for our state legislature, who has served in the Army Reserves. And in that same article, it mentions Josh Butner, a former Navy SEAL, recently declared candidate for Congress in Southern California, Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath from Kentucky, former Marine. And so there's...
Everybody saw her video. That's cool.
Is this a coincidence, or is there a trend? Veterans running as Democrats for office across the country at this moment in time? Anything
I think so.
unique about your experience?
Well, I can tell you as far as what's happening right now, I feel like I hear from a millennial veteran a couple times a week who's thinking about running for Congress, and I enjoy those conversations. Look, for me, I can just talk about my path as to how it happened. Look, I'm fortunate. I grew up comfortably. There was nobody who was in political office who could make a decision that was going to take food off my family's table or anything like that. There are people in politics who have that perspective, and it's really valuable. I'm not one of those people. So for me, the first time that I was on the receiving end of decisions by politicians that were negatively affecting my life, I was in my mid-20s, right? I was in Afghanistan. And I was already thinking about running for office before that, but that made a huge impact on my outlook on politics and how I viewed things. And then I came home, and, well, I mean, to give you an example, I can remember at one point, we had a mission to go to Jalalabad, which is in eastern Afghanistan. And you have to go through a mountain pass they refer to as the Jaybad Pass that even, absent the idea of the Taliban, would just be a very dangerous road trip. I mean, it's not a safe route to travel at all. And we were supposed to have helicopters for that trip. That was the plan. And I remember somebody telling me, and I don't even know if they were right about this, but it seemed right. It fit into what was going on in the world. A couple of days beforehand, somebody said, well, we're not going to have helicopters because those assets are being moved to Iraq. So stuff like that happened, and in my head, I'm going, okay, that's a political decision somebody made that is definitely having an impact on my life and all the people I see around me. So then when I came home and I saw, for instance, that there had been big cuts to Medicaid, and they were claiming all these victories on the budget and hurting a lot of people. To me, it looked very similar. It looked like a political decision that was a negative impact on people's life, but they were going with the politics of it. And that's always sort of shaped the way that I've seen politics. When people talk about the profession of politics, they talk about making political decisions. I've always thought of it as you make a decision based on what you believe is right, and then if you're good at politics, you manage the political consequences of that decision. It's not, what are the right political moves in this decision. It's what's the right thing to do, and then, you know, I know what I'm doing. I'll manage the consequences of this, but I'm going to do the right thing first. And I think I see that in a lot of folks who have served who then enter politics.
Yeah, well, I think it's great. Again, thank you for your service. And
Thank you.
not a coincidence, it has served as an inspiration to many veterans who maybe never would have thought about pursuing public service, or who thought about it but needed that nudge to see the power of example to finally take that.
Let me add, the other reason I think it's important is if you look at Washington right now, and a lot of state capitals too, unfortunately. If you look at politics across the board right now, one of the things that stands out to me is that we do have, not all, but we do have a lot of folks who the hardest thing they've ever been through in their life is the campaign that put them in office. And that's not to say, if that's the case, it doesn't mean you can't be good at the job and you can't be an ethical, character-driven person who can then make the right decisions. But there's no question in my mind that when that is the hardest thing that you've ever done, it is slightly more likely that you're going to think that losing that job would be the worst thing that could ever happen, and then make decisions that are much more political. And that's, you know, I don't want to go straight to talking about the president, but but look, like, here's a person who, a piece of news that has kind of fallen through the cracks is that he recently decided that he was no longer, the commander-in-chief under the Trump administration was not going to be the one who made decisions about whether more people are sent to places like Afghanistan, which is extraordinary, because he's saying, I'm going to take credit when the good stuff happens, and I'm going to blame the Pentagon, blame the generals when the bad stuff happens. And that offends me, because that's him not having the courage to make those commander-in-chief decisions. They're talking about maybe sending 4,000 new soldiers to Afghanistan, and no matter what you think about that decision, that's 4,000 Americans who have the courage to follow that order. They probably deserve a commander-in-chief with the courage to give the order in the first place. And so, anyway, so that's one of the reasons I think that it is helpful to have more folks who have served.
So since you're bringing up the President of the United States, got to tell you, I did not appreciate my Thanksgiving weekend being interrupted by a Twitter storm of his, alleging millions of illegal votes, and naming California specifically, right? Without a shred of evidence. He made it as President-elect Trump, and he's made it as president, obviously, which leads us to this commission he's decided to form, the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. And has asked for your thoughts on that. Clearly, Jason also serves in the role as chair of a DNC counter commission, if you will.
And Alex is on that commission. And is one of the most active members of that commission.
So for those who haven't, so for the members of the audience and those watching and listening at home who haven't tracked it as closely, can you describe the President's Commission, the DNC Commission, sort of your role, your vision there, well above and beyond the recent data request that we keep saying no to?
I'm going to do that if you'll also talk about the data request afterwards, because you've done some great stuff. So the President's Commission, that's what they call it, right? On election integrity, I think. I call it...
got to do the air quotes.
Yeah, you got to do the air quotes. I call it the Voter Suppression Committee to re-elect the President. That's what it is. So, look, first of all, this is not a policy difference between the parties. That's what they want to present it as. That's not what this is. This is a political strategy by the Republican Party that goes back a couple of decades now. And it shouldn't be treated as any different than when they make decisions about what to say in their TV ads, or who to send mailers to, or which doors to knock on. They've made a decision that instead of crafting policies that reach out to minorities and the disabled and low-income folks, instead of doing that, they're going to exclude them. So instead of including them in their party, they're going to exclude them from the democratic process. It's a purely political strategy. It's all it is. It's how we ought to think about it. It's how we ought to talk about it. And when the President of the United States said that there were 3 to 5 million illegal voters in the election, I argue that that is the biggest lie that a sitting president has ever told. Now, some people say that I might be wrong, and what I always say to those people is, if you're right, the same guy told whatever lie you're thinking of. So, like, we're pretty close either way, right? So we can have an argument, but it's academic. But the reason he did that, all right, well, first of all, probably initially he may have done that because he's a deeply insecure human being and he lost the popular vote by about that amount. That's probably what it was initially. But the reason you didn't see Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell or anybody stand up and say, hey, that's not true, is because it fits in with their strategy. The strategy is, if you can undermine faith in American democracy, then you can create obstacles to voting. And that's step one and step two in the Republican voter suppression strategy, which I saw up close when I was Secretary of State in Missouri. Step three, by the way, is just create obstacles to the obstacles. And so that's what this is. And so I think it's deeply important that we fight back against it. And it's a good segue into their attempt to grab all this data, which Alex has been one of the leaders in the country of standing up against that. Yeah. And so since this is a conversation, I think you should talk about that a little bit. So.
Oh, thank you, Jason.
No problem. A couple of politicians.
And so to continue on that topic here, so Jason laid out sort of the whole premise of all this. When I get asked about the data request and our refusal to comply, I have to remind, whether it's a constituent, a reporter, anybody, like, this is so problematic from the very get-go. It's not just about the request. It's not just about the commission. It's about the very fundamental premise for the commission. As Jason mentioned, the president can't get his head or his ego around the fact that he lost the popular vote. So somehow he needs to justify it. He claims millions of illegal votes, calls out specific states, including California, where he lost by the biggest margin. And because there's no truth to it, no evidence to it, and by the way, could conveniently distract from Russian interference in last year's election, he creates this commission. And boy, it's not just any commission. You know, we'll put it under the seal of the Vice President of the United States, again, not taking any responsibility. But the co-chair, the true driving force, is my counterpart from Kansas, Secretary Chris Kobach, someone with a long, documented, you heard of him.
Who apparently has pretty high name recognition in San Francisco.
Right, with a long history of championing voter suppression strategies. And by the way, he's going to need some help. So let's, Commissioner Van Spakovsky or Commissioner J. Christian Adams and, others. So the agenda, the goal of the commission is very clear to me before it's even gotten started. And as the first act of the commission, before it's even met to establish policies, ground rules, procedures on how they're going to operate, they send this letter to all 50 states saying, not just, hey, can you share some voter information with us? They want, for every voter in America, first name, middle name, last name, date of birth, social security information. If we just stopped right there, it's like an identity thief's dream, right? But it goes beyond that. It gets into party affiliation, vote history, felony records in the past, if any, military service history, if any, et cetera, et cetera. So number one, it's very invasive. It's an invasion of privacy. Number two, that original request said, we're going to compile all this. The form in which they asked us to submit, by the way, was very insecure from a cyber standpoint. They pledged to make it all available on one portal. So if you're really trying to do Vladimir Putin a favor, this is exactly what you do, right? Part of the resiliency of our election system is that it is very decentralized. You have 50 different states and then counties within each state that administer elections on the ground. So let's just put it all in one place and available for those who seek to do us harm. We just can't ignore those facts. So I was the first out of the box to say no. Over time, more than 40 states have said no, at least partially, if not completely. And we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep fighting those data requests because we know we know what their objectives are. But while we've said no in the meantime, we just have to expect that they're going to keep escalating. Right? They've been sued. There's about 7 lawsuits pending. And initial rulings have said, well, the commission is allowed to request and gather data. As I've read the rulings, and I'm not an attorney, but I have really good ones that work for me. We read it the same way. Well, they're allowed to request. That doesn't mean I'm compelled to provide. So I will continue to say no and fight them every step of the way. But they're just getting started. They're not going away because their voter suppression agenda is not going away. So this is something that will continue to evolve. And again, as chair of the DNC's Truth-Telling Commission, we have, and as one of your fellow commissioners, we have our work cut out for us over the course of the next year. So let's continue to explore these issues, both with your DNC hat on, but also talk to us a little bit about your leadership with Let America Vote. For those who haven't heard about Let America Vote, what is it? What's been your activity to date? What's your vision going forward? And how do these two efforts dovetail?
So after the election, when Trump started telling this big lie, one of the things that occurred to us, so Abe Rakove is here, who's the executive director, and also, let's see, Dan Pfeiffer's here, who's on the advisory board. Yeah, everybody, sure. Yeah. And, all of us, what I think we all realized when he started doing this was, it's not like we didn't know that voter suppression was a big part of the Republican political strategy. This made it really clear that it was at the core of the Trump reelection strategy. But the other piece to this was recognizing that when we being people who are in favor of letting American eligible citizens vote, when we've beat back this stuff over the past several years, it's generally been in court. And then when you recognize, okay, they're putting Jeff Sessions in charge of the Department of Justice, which means and this has borne itself out, literally switching sides in the cases. Like picking up their papers from one council table, which was like fighting for voting rights, and going to the voting suppression table. So DOJ switching sides and President Trump appointing the judges. So the legal strategy remains super important, but what became very clear to us was it's now very urgent that there be a political argument as well. So the battle has to go from a court of law and expand into the court of public opinion. So what Let America Vote is it is us creating political consequences for folks who make it harder to vote. So if you are a politician trying to make it harder to vote, we're working to make it harder for you to get reelected, which it really thanks. Which really, for the most part, had not really been done. And so for instance, right now, they have elections in November, this November in Virginia, and there's been a lot of voter suppression bills that they have passed and the governor's vetoed, some that they have attempted to pass. They have a Republican majority in the legislature there. So we have 50 folks on the ground right now in Virginia knocking on doors. They're going to make about 500,000 voter contacts by the election. That'll affect the governor's race, but also 10 legislative districts, 8 of which are held by Republicans who have gone the wrong way on voting rights. And we're active in other places as well. We have over 55,000 folks that have gone to letamericavote.org and signed up to volunteer. We encourage you to do that because there's ways to help whether you're in one of these states or not. And we obviously also have had a lot of folks go on and give. We've raised about $2 million. So we've been around about 5 months. So it's exciting that folks get that, look, a few years ago, if you brought this up, people would be like, okay, so voting, right? Like they wouldn't necessarily have, it's not the sexiest issue, right? But now I think people absolutely recognize like this is at the heart of what they're trying to do. And it's wrong. It's un-American. So that's what
it's interesting you mentioned that because I've been telling this story quite a bit lately. When I ran for city council, I think did serve pretty well for 7.5 years in Los Angeles, ran for the state senate, served, I think, well for 8 years there. And then when I started telling my friends and family and advisors, 2014, the Secretary of State's office is going to be open. That feels right. That's where we need to be next. Look what's happening in all these other states. The voter ID laws, the purging of voter rolls, the reduction or elimination of early voting, the Shelby v. Holder decision when the Supreme Court of the United States gutted the teeth of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which had stood for nearly 50 years. That's what opened the floodgates on the legal voter suppression efforts. Not only is that wrong, but California is California. We cannot just say no, but we can show a better way. So I want to run for Secretary of State. Are you with me? And almost unanimously, even my best, closest friends said, Secretary of State, really? Look, I like you. I'll support you, whatever you want. And voter registration, getting people to vote, that's good and all, but really? To your point, it's not that sexy.
Right.
Thankfully, I was elected in 2014. I had a chance to show the better way. We're going to talk about some of those issues, but then 2016 happened. right? And people have been reminded in a way that we haven't thought of in a long time of the fundamental and raw power of things like, yes, the ability to register to vote without any unnecessary barriers or obstacles, or the importance of access to the ballot box if you're a registered voter without any unnecessary barriers or obstacles, because what's at stake when that is called into question or when that is threatened.
And really, you have made it so that California is helping lead the way, like things like automatic voter registration, pre-registration at 16 and 17, and that's really important. I mean, it's important that California be in a position to show the rest of the country look how convenient this can be, so that as you're going around the country, you can say, like, look, here's how it ought to work, right? I mean, and by the way, it is funny because when I told folks I was going to run for Secretary of State in 2012, I remember a family member asking me, so you'll do like foreign relations with other states? And I remember always thinking, how great would that be if that were the job? Because I can tell you, during my 4 years as Secretary of State, we did not go to war with, and we surround a lot of states around Missouri. Nothing. I kept the peace. And so yeah, thank you. Anyway, but
what's John Kerry going to do then?
yeah, right. But it's really valuable to be able to make the argument as to, well, look how convenient this would be. So instead of just constantly having an argument about, I mean, look, you are statistically more likely to be struck by lightning as an American than you are to commit voter fraud. But instead of constantly having to have that argument, it's nice to be able to say, in Oregon, they vote at home, they vote by mail. And, and because people are like, that makes sense. I mean, we live in a day and age where, like we were talking before we came out here, I'm a huge Royals fan, okay? Don't get mad. Y'all won yes, thank you. Y'all won the 14th series, like don't get mad. But I'm a huge Royals fan, and like I can get out my smartphone and tell it to tell my TV to, DVR the game so that when I come home I can watch it. But I gotta go wait in line for 2.5 hours to vote. And people, I'm not saying you should vote on your phone, but people recognize the disparity there, and they're used to a certain level of customer experience at this point. It's 2017. And so when states like California do things that make a lot of sense, progressive, practical stuff, it's very helpful for us to be able to use that to make our argument.
Yeah, and so let me do sort of a quick run through of some of these significant reforms that are in implementation mode right now in California. Number one, you can't vote if you're not registered to begin with, right? So California was one of the first states that launched online voter registration. So goodbye having to run to the library, the post office to get a form and fill it out and mail it in, and trust that the folks inputting your data wouldn't, misspell your name or I can't read my penmanship or things like that. When I was elected as secretary, 17.4 million Californians on the rolls. By the time the deadline came for last November's election, we were at 19.4.
That's awesome.
So we netted 2 million registered voters. But there's still another 5.5 to 6 million eligible but unregistered in California. So we have more work to do. So now we're in the process, thanks to the legislature and the governor for their support, of implementing automatic voter registration. So mark your calendars. April 1st of 2018, we'll go live with automatic voter registration, which means anybody who's eligible, got to be eligible, when you apply for or renew a driver's license or a state ID in California, you'll be systematically added to the voter rolls. And so we're going to keep moving the needle. We're going to get to 20 million registered voters before you know it, and still be able to go online and update your record with address change or whatever it is to maintain it. So we had a great push on voter registration, and people said to me, you might have related to this, you did such a great job on voter registration. Man, your turnout's going to be horrible. Right, because it's a math equation. How many people turn out versus how many people are registered, right? Numerator, denominator. See, big words, math.
Yeah. This is an MIT thing for you.
Thankfully, Californians, proved me right. We had record turnout, right? The previous turnout high in California was 2008, when there was a young man by the name of Barack Obama running for president. Mm-hmm. Last November, nearly 1 million more ballots cast than in November 2008. So we're getting to the polls, but we can do more. there was about 5 million people who were registered that didn't get out and vote last November. So thanks to the legislature again and the governor again, starting next year, counties will have the option of either conducting elections the good old-fashioned way, vote by mail, which is pretty popular in California, 60% of voters vote that way, or 40% of California is still a big number, people who want to go in person. You're really limited to one location, close to where you live, between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. on election day. Right? Now, I'm from Los Angeles. We have this thing called traffic that we deal with. Totally unfamiliar with it here, right? So if you're at work in person, trying to get home in traffic, maybe get food on the table or kids from school, and then go stand in line before 8 o'clock with hopefully not 2.5 hours of a wait to go cast your ballot, there's got to be a better way. And so having looked across the land to see what best practices are, counties starting in 2018 have the option to conduct elections like this. 4 weeks before Election Day, how about just every voter automatically receives their ballot in the mail? You don't have to ask for it, you don't have to sign up for it, you don't need an excuse. You know, Oregon does all vote-by-mail elections, Washington does, but Colorado does. This is what inspired the new California law. Every voter gets their ballot in the mail, but then you have options for how to return the ballot. You can mail it back, good old U.S. Postal Service. The counties would install what are known as ballot drop boxes throughout the county, so kind of like a mailbox, clearly marked for ballots only. And as a voter, you can drop it off anywhere that's convenient to you in those weeks leading up to the election. But it gets better. For those, like my mother, who insist on going to the polls in person, you have more options because you can modernize the polling place experience to what are known as vote centers, right? So that big ledger that we have to sign in that teeny tiny box when we go vote in person, when they look up our name, imagine if those were replaced by tablets or laptops, and they can look you up electronically. Not only more efficient that way, they can update the file, by the way, that, hey, Jason just voted over here. You can't run across town and try to vote again. But you give these vote centers access to the whole voter file, not just the voters in that neighborhood. So a voter all of a sudden has the option of voting anywhere in the county that's convenient to them.
So,
and it gets better.
Well, hold on. Before you do that, let me the difference between this and what they're doing on the side where they're trying to suppress the vote, right? Like what we've seen in places like the Georgia 6th, in places like the special election they had in Kansas, is the difference is so big, right? Like, so what they do is they consolidate the polling places, oftentimes in the areas that have people who have a nasty habit of not voting Republican, and they consolidate them. They're different from the polling places that were there in November, and now people are having this like scavenger hunt for their polling place in order to have their vote.
Go to elementary school. Why is it at the recreation center?
Right.
Or, you know.
So think about that. The difference of somebody who, first of all, I don't really get wanting to be a chief election official if you want to keep people from voting. It doesn't make a lot of sense to begin with. But the difference between what people like Secretary Kobach in Kansas are doing, which is trying to hide the ball, make it harder to vote, and then your Secretary of State who's like, if you take the time to show up, we're going to make sure that your ballot counts. Like, it's a pretty big difference. And one of them is clearly the right thing to do. You know?
So the last piece I was going to offer on this vote center piece is it gets better. You know, the flexibility of voting anywhere in the county, it's not just on election day. These vote centers will be open for a minimum of 11 days, up to and including election day. So imagine that, voting anywhere in the county that's convenient to you, whenever it's convenient to you, if you didn't vote by mail to begin with. It's actually a more efficient way of administering the elections, more secure, and more convenient for voters, heaven forbid. So, you know, when I was running for secretary saying, well, what they're doing in Texas is bad, North Carolina is bad, Wisconsin's bad, so on down the line, you know, it's not just about what we're saying no to, it's what we can say yes to and showing a better way. And the beauty of having it come out of California is we take all the excuses off the table for all the other states. No other state can say, well, you can do that there, but we're a big state. Well, you're not bigger than California.
Right.
Right. Well, you can do that there, but we're a diverse state. Well, you're not more diverse than California. Well, you can do that there, but politically we're a complex state. You are not more complex than the state of California. And so the challenge and the opportunity is how we show that these reforms can work here and then work together with friends like Jason, Let America Vote, you know, DNC, and anybody else who's willing to be part of the team to export these reforms to all the other states, especially those states that need it and clearly make a big difference when it comes to the national political landscape. So Jason, I get Abe's emails every couple of days, and I see your travels. You're campaigning here, you're opening up an office there, and you're testifying in the different states' legislature for or against legislation. Can you talk a little bit more about that broader perspective that you now have, not just from Missouri, but having traveled to so many states and having that pulse on the political landscape? What's going on out there that we ought to be aware of?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I'm really optimistic because of it. So I get this question a lot, particularly like when I'm here or a few other places. Like, it's basically the "what's it like out there" question, right? That's kind of what it is, and it's what's really inspiring and uplifting about it is how many people I have met who are really involved and really excited and weren't before. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I was in Tennessee speaking to the Tennessee Democratic Party. I've been getting invited to do a lot of that sort of thing, and that was maybe 2 or 3 months ago. And this woman named Dawn drove me around to different events throughout Tennessee, where I was speaking to Democratic groups. And from my perspective, it seemed like Dawn must be the ace number one MVP volunteer of the Tennessee Democratic Party. Like, everywhere we went, Dawn knew everybody. And at the end of the day, she was dropping me off at the airport. I was heading back to Kansas City, and I asked Dawn, I said, "Dawn, how long have you been volunteering with the Tennessee Democratic Party?" I said, "How many years?" And she said, "Years?" She said, "I started volunteering on January 20th, 2017. Yeah. And she said, "Before that, I had voted, but I had never done anything else." And like every event I go to, multiple people come up and tell me some version of that. And that's really exciting. And what I think that is, it's important to remember, 54% of the country voted for somebody who was not named Donald Trump to be president of the United States. And people aren't really waiting to stand up and say, "We don't agree with the way that you're doing things." And so there is, I think, a really incredible level of momentum out there. And I think what it all comes down to is that President Trump made sort of this deal with people that people don't talk about much. But, I got more votes, I think, as a Democrat from people who voted for Trump than I think anybody running, certainly in a competitive race last year. 220,000 folks voted for him and voted for me. And I'm a progressive. Everybody in my state knew that I'm a progressive. And they still voted for me. And so I talked to a lot of these people, and I still talk to a lot of them. They're my friends, they're my neighbors, they're people I went to high school with. And so what I keep hearing is, before November, what I would hear from people is they'd say, "You know what, I don't really like the guy." They'd say that. They'd say, "I don't like the guy. I don't like the way he treats people. I don't like the tweets. I don't like any of that." They'd say, "But doing that has made him really successful." And they said, "So if he will do that for the country and do that for me," what they'd say is, "I'm willing to give that a try." Well, the thing is that he's never made that transition. He's still the leader of the Trump organization, and he's not really become president. He's not doing that for them. Everything is about getting to tomorrow. Everything is about how he looks, and people really detect that. And I think that's what's really out there is people are saying, like, he's not doing what he said he would do. So when people concentrate on, well, is he keeping his promises? That is the most important promise that he has failed to keep, is I'm going to actually put you first instead of doing, because he's still a guy they don't like. Like, he's still doing all that stuff. He's still mean. He still says stuff they don't like, but he's not doing it for them. He's still just doing it for himself. That's what I'm feeling all across the country.
I remember at about his 100-day mark as president, and I still pause every time I say it, I was doing a panel with MSNBC, and they're kind of go around the table saying, "Oh my gosh, look what the first 100 days, right? The Muslim ban, the build the wall, it's all the same script. Can you imagine it getting any worse?" And person number one, "Oh my God, this is horrible. I can't imagine what." And the next person, "Oh, this is horrible. It can't get any worse." And it gets to me, I'm like, yeah, I can see how it can get worse. Mm-hmm. He could actually be effective in what he's saying. Yeah. And what he's doing. So thankfully, there's some sorts of backstops in keeping, the Muslim ban. So reminder, Mr. President, what we all learned in high school government class: 3 branches of government, not just one. All right, so those checks and accountabilities, and I think the American people are smarter than a lot of politicians give them credit for in having that astuteness, whether it's about rhetoric or authenticity, those sorts of things. Jason, another question I was curious about your thoughts on, because again, from Missouri, looking at California, or Midwest perspective, looking at California, or in the course of your travels, we keep in California hearing that we're the tip of the spear of the resistance, right? There's Trump and everything his administration is trying to do, and California is, blessed with this buffer. We have J.R. Brown as governor. Democrats have every constitutional office in the state. We have 2/3 majorities in the legislature, and we're sort of at odds at all his core policy proposals and are fighting back legally. We're fighting back legislatively. We're proud owners of the resistance movement. But how is California viewed in all the places between Washington, D.C. and California? Anything that's insightful and maybe helpful, constructive for us to think about?
Well, look, I think the good thing here is that the resistance, so to speak, is pretty widely spread, right? So, I don't think people think of it as that's the center of the resistance, but that's a good thing, right? Because for most people around the country, because the other thing I get asked that's similar is it's sort of the question about the different wings of the Democratic Party and that kind of thing, right? So how do people view this? How do people view that? The good thing is, instead of folks seeing it, for instance, as, well, this politician on my TV is bringing me into this, and I'm following them to the promised land, or, well, in California they're doing this, and so I have an opinion on that. The good thing is that's not what I'm seeing. What I'm seeing is what's bringing people like Dawn in Tennessee into the process is a person usually who lives like down their street. That's what's really exciting about it. So whenever people say, well, where are you in this realm of, or where are you on, the different debates within the party, that's more of like a question that I think is not what people are asking on the ground, and that's good. What people are asking, or what's bringing people in, is like their neighbor down the street had a house party to call their members of Congress about health care, right? And they went, or to write letters to the editor. And so the exciting thing about it is that they're not talking about, well, here's what's going on in California. They're like, here's what's going on in our neighborhood. And I think that's really exciting. That's a good thing.
It's great. And so now channeling, a lot of people that I've talked to up and down the state of California since November 8th, particularly since January 20th, they're equally, passion that's there. To a much higher degree than there was even before November, and people wanting to do something. And we have capacity. I mean, every election cycle, I visit Democratic clubs, said, well, we're in a safe district, and so we're going to start calling into Arizona or Nevada or, a swing state over here. Tons of calls made into Georgia and Kansas, in these last specials, et cetera. But for those people who can't travel to other states to go register voters, to go organize and mobilize in GOTV, what advice or ideas do you have for folks that are here that want to make an impact beyond California to other regions or other states?
There's a lot you can do. In fact, a few people came up to me before we started the event and told me they made calls last year for me, which I really appreciate, which is good. Thank you. So clearly that's something you can do, and you can get again, I'll plug letamericavote.org. We'll give you plenty of opportunities, even if you don't have to get on a plane. We'll give you opportunities to help. And so there are a lot of opportunities to do that, but also in your own state. Like in Southern California, and throughout California, there are going to be districts that play a huge role in taking back the U.S. House of Representatives, which we have to do, by the way. So yeah, there is a ton that you can do, and what it all comes down to is, this is what I talk about a lot, is about us all together, wherever you live, being unafraid to make our argument. I mean, at the heart of what Let America Vote is, because people often say to me, they'll say, but, haven't we been losing this argument on voter suppression and voter access for a long time? What I always say to them is, no, we've not been participating in the argument. And that's what makes the difference. And so, like, if you look at my race last year, I I outperformed the top of the ticket by 16 points. But I wasn't out there pretending to be a conservative Democrat or a moderate Republican. I was out there just telling people what I believed. And the thing about politics is, so wherever you are, you can call, you can make your argument. The thing about it is that voters will forgive you for believing something they don't agree with, so long as they know you genuinely believe it, and they know that you believe it because you really believe it'll help them. Like, they're a part of your plans, of your vision. And you can do that from anywhere. You can be a part of that from anywhere. And I'll tell a quick voting-related story about that, which is going back to people saying, well, haven't we been losing this argument for a long time? Well, in 2012, when I ran for Secretary of State in Missouri, it was a year where President Obama actually lost Missouri, even though he won the election. He lost Missouri by almost 10 points. And I was on the ballot on the same day. And throughout that campaign, it was clear that the biggest issue in the campaign was going to be photo ID. That's what people most associated as an issue with the Secretary of State's office. And my Republican opponent that was all his ads were about photo ID. And so at the beginning of the race, people said, well, you really need to find a way to moderate your position, to find a way to where you're in favor of requiring a photo ID in order to vote. And I was not willing to do that. I was going to make my argument. I believe to this day, the only Secretary of State candidate in a competitive, really hyper-competitive general election Secretary of State race where I ran a statewide ad about my opposition to photo ID, saying why I was opposed to it, instead of being quiet about it and instead of pretending I had the position that the other side had. And on election day, a lot of folks, I was standing at the polls shaking hands, and a lot of folks walked up to me and they shook my hand and they would say, you're wrong about photo ID. But then a lot of them would say, but you told me what you believed, and I understand why you believe it, and I appreciate why, and I'm going to go vote for you. And so at the end of the day, like, what it's really about is you don't win arguments you don't make. And so whatever you can do, it's 2017, technology is there. Whatever you have to do to be a part of making the argument, that's how we're going to win elections, and ultimately that's how you unify the country as well. So.
Quick housekeeping announcement. We're about 4 or 5 minutes from audience Q&A. I have a couple more quick questions here, but there's a microphone stage left to your right in the back. If you have a question or start thinking about a good one, you can start forming a line back there, and we'll get to audience Q&A in just a couple of minutes. Just sort of my own response to the last question about what California voters can do elsewhere. With my proud California Democrat hat on, would also like to remind us that, look, California is a big state, and yes, there's San Francisco and the greater Bay Area, and yes, there's Los Angeles and the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area, but there's a lot of regions in California that are our own internal Michigans and Wisconsins and Pennsylvanias, et cetera. So let's not lose sight of places like Orange County, the Inland Empire, the Central Valley, and beyond, where there's a lot of work to do, a lot of hurting working class folks that whether it's political party infrastructure on the left hasn't really been there in a way that it should be, or other types of political infrastructure to engage in a franchise. So let's not lose sight of our fellow Californians in need of some of our help too. So because we're getting ready, and there's clearly a lot of interest for some audience Q&A, let me culminate this section of today's program with a quick speed round. All right, speed round. Jason, what's your favorite ice cream?
My grandmother's orange chocolate recipe. It's like the greatest thing you've ever had. Actually, my wife made it. I brought it into the campaign office, and people were at least nice enough to tell me it was the greatest thing they ever had. I think they were telling the truth. It's
favorite movie or TV show?
Favorite movie is Scent of a Woman, because of that Al Pacino speech at the end is like just, I could watch that over and over.
Over and over again. All right. And I was correct, right? This is clearly not your first time in California or the Bay Area. So being from Missouri, have you found a good barbecue or ribs joint in California yet?
This is one of those moments where you got to really decide how much of a politician.
As far as I know, you're not running for governor here.
In a nuanced way, Alex. I have been to barbecue or ribs places in California that are clearly, objectively good barbecue or ribs places, no doubt. But like when you grow up in Kansas City, which is where the only real and terrific and amazing barbecue is in the country. I mean, everything else. So here's what you do. So here's what you do if you're me. You didn't expect this nuanced of an answer. What you do is you remember that this is not, you can't put this in the same category. It's unfair. And so in that respect, yes, I have had some very good barbecue.
And my sources tell me he gives the exact same answer in Texas, the exact same answer in North Carolina.
I would, but it would be about Kansas City barbecue. Absolutely, it would be. It would be.
And last but not least, your favorite member of the Kansas City Royal roster who graduated from Chatsworth High School in Southern California.
We were talking about this in the green room before. Mike Moustakas. And you got to be a little impressed that when you brought him up out there, I was like, he holds the California state record for home runs. I told you I'm a huge nerd about this. Yeah, Mike Moustakas, Californian, who's also my son's favorite. My son is almost 4. That may be because his nickname is Moose and he thinks he's an actual moose. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that's why. But yeah, for both my son and I, at the moment it's Moose. Probably tied with Danny Duffy, who's actually another Californian. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
That's the answer y'all came for.
All right. A lot of interest for audience Q&A. So in order of folks lined up at the mic, we just ask that you quickly introduce yourself, no speeches, straight to your question, please.
Hi, my name is Nama Firestone, and thank you guys so much. Secretary Padilla, one way of getting the vote more accessible is using the internet, but I heard about a professor from University of Michigan that in 24 hours cracked the voting machines in Washington, D.C. And I'm wondering how safe are our voting machines here in California, and what do you do for cybersecurity when people register online that it doesn't get hacked?
Great. That can be a whole nother Commonwealth panel just on that, but I'll give you sort of the top lines. Think of sort of 2 different categories. One is, the process we use to vote, right? The election systems, the voting systems. Know that equipment used in California has to be certified for use, which means they have to be tested and certified to meet or exceed certain security requirements in California. We think we have the gold standard of what's required, including auditable paper trails. Number 1, by law in California, our machines can never be connected to the internet, so it's impossible to systematically hack or rig the elections. And third, just to be safe, we go the extra mile. After every election, every county is required to take a percentage of the precincts and do a hand count of the votes to make sure that it matches up with the machine tally, both for accuracy purposes and integrity purposes. On the voter registration side, no, there's a difference between internet voting, which we're nowhere near being able to do, but making things like voter registration possible, online. So we have a statewide centralized voter registration database that's the newest in the nation, because we were the last to come into compliance with that requirement. But latest software,
which means
firewalls.
He did it, is what it means, is that he got it done.
Encryption, all those things, and kind of the proof that lets me rest easy at night is, contrary to the president's belief, there have been commissions, there's constantly studies, audits, investigations. Does voter fraud exist? Yeah, but it's extremely rare and always very isolated, so our current safeguards are working. And we can get into more detail after if you'd like. Next question.
Hi, I'm Frankie Tobin. My question for Jason is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the politics of patriotism, because to my mind, there's nothing more patriotic than voting, and yet it seems to be an issue that's been fully co-opted by the GOP, patriotism at large. And so how are you thinking about voting and patriotism as an issue in the next election?
No, it's a fantastic question. There's no question that over the past several years there has been, particularly post 9/11, there was a period where patriotism was directly inserted, and usually not in a very friendly way, into the political debate and the questioning of each other's patriotism, which, by the way, is not a very patriotic thing to do to begin with. And I think you nailed it when you were saying voting is patriotic. I think a lot of things are patriotic and should be thought of as patriotic. I think about this a lot when, Alex mentioned that I was the first millennial elected to a statewide office in the U.S., which, by the way, comes with no special powers at all. Like, my parents think that's super cool, but it's on their fridge. Other than that, it's not worth a lot. But what it does mean is you get, in my case, asked a lot of questions about the millennial generation. And often there's sort of this tinge to it of, it's sort of a way of asking, like, are they as patriotic as previous generations? And I think, well, first of all, from my experience, the years I served with an awful lot of millennials who had signed on the dotted line knowing that there was a good chance that by doing that, they'd end up, in the seat right behind me in a vehicle in Afghanistan, right? So that answers that question. But also, I spent more time as Secretary of State of Missouri in Ferguson than I did in any other community for my official duties in my state. I saw an awful lot of patriotic people who felt that they needed to have their voice heard there. I thought that was patriotic. I think that showing up at town halls and demanding questions be answered about health care, I think that's patriotic. And when you go back to the question about this generation, the sort of stereotype that people like to lay on this generation is one of apathy or laziness. But really, at the heart of all of it is like a selfish stereotype. It's a stereotype of selfishness. And what it all is centered on is this idea that there's somehow something wrong with the fact that a lot of millennials really want the company that signs their paycheck, or whoever it is that signs their paycheck, to be an entity that reflects to them in a way that is consistent with their personal idea of who they are. And so people somehow find that to be entitled or spoiled. I think that's patriotic. I think it's a good thing that you want to be a part of making the world a better place, including between 9 and 5. And so I think there's an awful lot of ways to think about patriotism, but in our politics, to answer your question in the shortest way, I'm really happy to be a part of a generation that doesn't measure the patriotism of a politician by their eagerness to send people to war, but instead by their willingness to do what's right, no matter the political cost of that decision. And that's where I think our politics are going on patriotism.
And if I can add just one other element consistent with that theme, when the president, or anybody else for that matter, starts alleging massive voter fraud, millions of illegal votes, et cetera, that's disrespectful, and it calls questions of professionalism, ethics of not just Republican and Democrat secretaries of state and local elections officials, but to literally millions of American citizens who volunteer on election day to work the polls, to serve their patriotic duty. So he's also impugning and insulting them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Nicola Mazumdar, and Mr. Kander, I saw you on television a short time ago and was impressed with your passion and your ability to articulate these things. It made me much more hopeful of the success of this, so I hope that continues. My question has
so far, a fantastic question.
Okay, good. My question has to do with coordination of efforts across these efforts to go against suppression of votes. Having read Democracy in Chains, the Nancy McLean book, and The Great Suppression, it's at all different levels, and that includes that many people on the other side will not think that voting is a good idea. It's bad. It's that makers and takers libertarian argument. Can you tell me how, if you're coordinating across different organizations to attack all of these problems in some way, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, and basically everywhere that the law allows, we are. And with, the great thing about, I don't know if it's a great thing, one of the things about the situation where Donald Trump is president and the Republicans control Congress is what you're not seeing is a whole lot of folks arguing over turf. People are, there's a real, what I refer to as a grab and oar sort of mentality out there, which is grab an oar and let's get to work. We got a lot of work to do together. And so we are finding that the only thing that limits us from working together with other people is time. It's just, there's so many good folks in the space. But we're making a huge effort, and so is everybody else. It's a real sense of teamwork, frankly.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Samuels, and I've just been told to be fast, but Millennials
No
are
startup
fabulous.
pitch.
They're so underrated. Speaking as a boomer, it's an incredible group of people, an incredible cohort, and yay. My question is, it's very easy to have this conversation in San Francisco where everybody agrees with everybody. When you go out and you're making the argument about fighting voter suppression, where people really don't respect another person's vote because it isn't like theirs, how are you immunizing against that if you are able to?
So the great thing about this is that your question, I totally understand, because it feels like the Republican Party as a monolith is in favor of voter suppression. The thing is that the vast majority of Republican elected officials who have said something on the topic, they feel that there's an advantage for them because they want to stay in office and they think if fewer people vote, they can. But the average voter, independent, Democrat, Republican, whatever, they're not interested in seeing politicians of any stripe change the rules of elections in order to make it easier for them to win elections. I mean, voters, they don't have an interest in seeing that happen. They don't think that's the way the system ought to work. And so people are really, they're really receptive to the argument, but also it comes down to, on all these issues, as I go around the country, it comes down to making the argument and doing it forcefully and doing it proudly, because that's what people respect. And so whether it's this issue or whether others, like my experience has been, because there is sort of this debate right now, right? Like, do we go, and I think it's a false debate. Like, do we go after the other sides, the people who voted the other way, and try and convince them, or do we go after the folks who already agree with us? The reason I think it's false is because that assumes you have to say different things to those two groups in order to do that. My experience has been that if you go and you genuinely make your argument, whether it's about voting or anything else, to these folks who may not have been inclined to voting for you, you have a greater chance of convincing them. But the other thing that happens is the people who already agree with you, it's 2017. You don't have conversations with people and have other people not know it if you're in politics. These folks know that you went to folks who may not agree with them and you said pretty much the same thing and had the same values when you're talking to them. And people get excited about that. And so it's every reason to do that. You don't have to make the choice. It's funny how politics is a lot like being a good person, right? like if you want to be good at it, you just like tell people what you really believe. And so some examples from last year for me is, I could be in St. Louis talking to a Planned Parenthood, event, talking at a Planned Parenthood event, talking about equal pay. But, I might 4 hours later be in a rural area talking to a local reporter, and I'll bring it up, and I'll point out that, if you're a guy and your wife is working at a job where she's getting paid less than somebody, in the exact same position, well, you both have less money to send your kids to college, right? And so you don't have to change your values, and you shouldn't. And so the answer to your question is that don't try not to mistake when you see elected Republicans on TV saying something that's necessarily what the average voter who's a Republican or an independent or whatever believes. It's not necessarily the case. Sometimes, politicians have a real different interest. There's that old Upton Sinclair saying, which I'll butcher, but it's that it's very difficult to convince someone of something that they're paid not to understand. But voters don't suffer from that. Voters are free agents to listen to your argument, and so the key is making it.
So, now there's a lot of interest. We have time for just 2 more questions. So, next question.
Hi, thank you both for coming, and Jason, thanks for everything you did for Missouri. I'm a fellow Missourian. My name's Tyler. I grew up in Chesterfield.
Look at Missourian getting applause in San Francisco. I love it.
If you're looking for St. Louis pizza, it's at Torny's in North Beach.
All right.
It's
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks for everything you've done. Our state has become increasingly red over both of our lifetimes. We're about the same age. I appreciate everything you're doing on a national level, but what do you see as your role with the changing dynamics of Missouri politics from here forward?
I see it as similar to my role generally, which is to just go out and make my argument every single day. That's what I've been doing. I'm a Missouri voter, and I have something to say. And I'm a voter in this country, and I have something to say. So I feel, I guess I have the same role as any voter who's passionate. And for me, I also happen to have a platform to be able to get up and talk about what I care about. And so that's what I'm doing.
Great.
Thank you.
Next and final question.
Well, first and most of all, thank you to both of you guys for what you guys do and protecting our boats. We need more secretaries of state like you guys. My name is Robert Camacho, and actually, I had a question, but actually I read today's New York Times. Uh-oh. And I want you guys to let me know how you guys feel. The title is, "To Protect Boating, Use Open Source Software." Can you, each one of you guys, tell us how you guys feel about open source software?
So have you read that article? I haven't read.
I haven't read it, but I know the issue.
Okay, go for it.
So open source technology, for those who really get into the voting machines, voting equipment stuff, one of the big complaints historically, if you go back to Diebold and vote flipping and whatnot, is, well, the machines that we use to vote on, there's these private sector vendors that are, selling or leasing the equipment to counties across the country. How do we know that they're properly calibrated and there's no funny business going on? So from a technology standpoint, one of the counters is, well, let's develop an open source technology where the source code that's driving the systems is transparent for public view. People know whether it's legit or not and can be approved upon. When I was in the state Senate, I authored the bill that allows for open source voting systems to come into California. As Secretary of State, one of the initiatives we have this year is another round of funding to upgrade our voting systems, because everything we have is old. It's like 15, 20 years old based on even older technology. There's a lot of people in the technology community that think open source is the way to go in a way that's secure, transparent, et cetera. But as of today, there is no open source voting system that has been brought forward either for federal certification or for state testing and certification. So we've opened the door for it in California. We're trying to make monies available for more R&D to develop ultimately that voting open source voting system. But there's nothing sort of in the marketplace today that's publicly owned or privately owned. So I do think it has a lot of promise, but it's not there yet. And while we're not there yet, California is already sort of leaps and bounds from the rest of the nation in sort of embracing open source for election technology. So hope that answers your question. So before I say thank you all for coming, as moderator, I get the point of personal privilege to asking the final question of the evening. In Commonwealth Club tradition, 60 seconds or less. Jason, what is your 60-second idea to change the world?
Make healthcare a right.
You have 55 more seconds.
55 seconds. Don't applaud. I only have... No, it's fine to applaud. No. So think about it this way. So I'm for single payer. Think about it this way. When you pay property taxes for public school, you pay those whether or not you are sending your kid to public school. And most people do not then turn around and say, I'm not paying these because I'm sending my kid to private school. People don't say that because they recognize there is a public good in having everybody be educated. They also recognize that they like the idea that that is available to them should they need it. So even if they send their kid to private school, it makes sense that everybody has the ability to be educated in the public system. And then you go later into Social Security. Some people are fortunate enough not to need it, but they still are paying their payroll taxes throughout their life. It's going into Social Security, and most people are not saying, I have all this money waiting for me, so I shouldn't have to pay any payroll taxes into Social Security. To me, the idea of having that publicly available option makes a lot of sense. In 2009, I was one of, I think, about 1,000 I was a state legislator then, state legislators around the country who, signed on to a letter advocating for a public option. I've been for this for a long time. I was for it last year, during the race. I'm for this. I think it makes sense. And what it all comes down to is just the idea that that should be available to everybody and making it a basic right. And why it's an idea to change the world is that this is an opportunity for America to lead on this, to say, you know what, we are going to make this a right. And then it can be one of the things we talk to the rest of the world about making it right as well. So, thank you.
So to all of you in the audience and those listening in from home, thank you for your time, thank you for your attention, thank you for your passion. Thank you to the Commonwealth Club for having us. And please, another final round of applause for our special guest, Jason Kander. All right, great job, man. Good job. Thanks.